Greetings, this is Chef Jack, and yes, it's time to open up those computers and do some online learning. This is the video 2 of 2 for Module 2. That's a lot of 2's. Currently, we're looking at the 4 basic food groups. We've already looked at water and fats, oils. So fats, oils, and their relatives, lipid, energy source, and certain fat-soluble nutrients. As we talked about, lipids don't mix well with water. If you think about it, whenever you make like a vinaigrette, unless it's some type of permanent emulsion, it'll just separate. When I say permanent emulsion, I'm talking something like mayonnaise, something that if you make it correctly, it should stay emulsified. Or like a chilled stock. When you chill a stock overnight, the fat will rise to the top and the stock will stay at the bottom. And again, in the kitchen, we're not talking, usually we don't say lipid family. It encompasses fats, oils, phospholipids, beta carotene, which you find in carrots, squash, vitamin E, cholesterol. And some of the structures of fats, vitamin A, D, E, and K. Fats generally have a high boiling point, and then that contributes to the caramelization and Maillard reaction, so you get nice brown and crispy. Think of fat on a grilled steak or pork chop. What's that called? Yes, yum. So the structure of fats, you've got saturated fats, saturated, and polyunsaturated. So to give you kind of a visual we'll go with saturated. Where carbon is 2 hydrogens all the way through. But unsaturated is some of the carbons in the middle are only attached to hydrogen, and then there's a double bond with the carbon. Generally, animal fat is mostly saturated. It is solid at room temperature. Plant oils, mostly unsaturated, is liquid at room temperature. Rancidity is just the oxidation of fat. It gives it an off flavor, smell, still safe to eat. Hydrogenation and trans fatty acids. Some examples are margarine and shortening. So basically they took a vegetable oil, added hydrogen to it, and so it mimicked butter in margarine's case, or shortening mimics lard. But in doing so, they created some unnatural compounds. So what exactly does trans fatty acid mean? Well, let's take a look. So here's the structure of fats. So you've got a cis-bonded unsaturated fat, and you can see the 2 hydrogens are on the same side. Whereas down here, trans-bonded, the hydrogens are on the opposite side of each other. And all foods now must state that they contain trans fat because they realize that it contributes to heart disease. And food manufacturers can actually, as they add hydrogen, they can add it either in the cis form or trans form. It was cheaper to do it in the trans form. That's why most of our processed foods have trans fatty acids, but now they're making trans fat free, so they can chemically add the hydrogens both on one side. So now you know. And then we will talk a little bit about high heat cooking. You've got frying, stir frying. Smoking point is when oil starts to break down. Medium, olive oil, coconut oil, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, soybean. And then finishing oils, these are generally oils that you don't want to heat because it will destroy or some of the flavors. So extra virgin olive oil, typically you don't want to cook with. Flaxseed oil, walnut, pistachio, avocado, hemp, and sesame seed. Working with fats, you've got emulsifiers. We'll talk a little bit about emulsifiers. It basically makes oil and water become sort of friends. So what it is, I've got a visual representation. And so you've got the water and you've got the oil. An emulsifier, in this case soy lecithin, one end of the emulsifier likes water, so he's over here. And then the other end of the emulsifier likes oil, so he's over here. So they form almost like a film barrier between the two so that the water and oil can mix and stay mixed. Otherwise, the oil would all join one another and just be. So fats and emulsions, and these are triglycerides. And where you find emulsifiers, especially in the kitchen, is in egg yolks. And emulsified vinaigrette, mayonnaise, hollandaise, chocolate, beurre blanc, ice creams, these are all emulsions. And then butter, what kind of emulsion do you think butter is? Is it oil in water or water in oil? Correct. So water or butter is typically about 80 to 82% fat and then 18% or so of liquid whey. And that's why when you melt a pound of butter, you usually get about 13 ounces of oil, clarified butter, and then 2 to 3 ounces of the liquid whey. Carbohydrates are also a main energy source. So the simplest carbohydrate is sugars. And I think what gets confusing is people, you've got starch, but you have different types of starch. So it can be change of glucose, and depending on when that plant wants to use that energy, it'll store it either as two different types of starch, amylose and amylopectin. And if you think the easiest way to think of it is potatoes, there's what's called waxy potatoes, like red potatoes, new potatoes, and they contain more amylose in it. Whereas amylopectin, think of it like a russet potato, it's not as waxy, but it's all starch, it's just different types of starch. But some chefs will say, well, it's different amounts of starch, but it's all starch. And then here's foodsubs.com. I like this website. It kind of gives you how to substitute different starches, thickeners, and then also, depending on what you're doing with it, if you're going to freeze something that you've thickened, there's different starches that freeze better than others, or work better with fruits or more acidic type of foods. Or do you want it clear or kind of an opaque look? So that's a good little website to keep in mind. And these are, so amylose is a straight chain, and then amylopectin is more of a cross, and that's for more longer term storage. Just kind of go through these. Glycogen, it's stored in like an animal in their liver, and that's for very quick energy use. Generally, you find pectin under the skin of apples and some other fruits, and that pectin will help give the thickness or viscosity to your jams and jellies. And these are just other polysaccharides. Plant gums, use this more in molecular gastronomy. Agar, gum arabic, guar gum, locust bean, xanthan gum. And if you look at a lot of salad dressing or ice cream labels, you'll see a lot of these guys in there to give it thickness, to keep it a stable emulsion. Ice creams, pick them up and they're very light. And then also, there's not much body to them. Whereas some more natural ice creams that have no stabilizer in it, generally the bucket of ice cream is heavier, and when you eat it, I think you just feel more satisfied. Glycemic index, that's more, how fast when that food breaks down, sugar get into the blood. There's some foods that are very quick. Think of like a soda. When you drink a soda, they can detect that sugar in your bloodstream in under 10 minutes. Whereas other foods, it might take 2 to 4 hours for your stomach and intestines to break it down to get into your blood system. And these chapters I just kind of put in here just to kind of skim through them. Honey, where does honey come from? We've got a big issue with honeybees right now. And, are we always going to have it? Then it talks a little bit about, I'll just go back to honey. There's different types of honey, and that's really where the honeybee was getting its nectar from. So that's how come you have like alfalfa honey or clover. Some honeys are just labeled as spring, summer, or late fall, and that's just whatever flowers are blooming, and that flowers contribute to the flavor. Modern sugar can come from cane or beets. Syrup, maple syrup, it takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And then there's different grades. You've got A, which is a clear, more clear maple syrup, and then grade B, which is a little bit darker, and it had a greater reduction, so it's probably like maybe 50-60 gallons of sap to a gallon. But I like to use it, and a lot of bakers like to use it because I think it has more flavor and it's a little bit cheaper. And typically in class I would make some pancakes and we'd taste some real maple syrup. Proteins, essential building blocks of the body. Proteins are sensitive. Proteins are made up of amino acids, and any animal source will contain 20 amino acids that we need for our, and again we've talked about this before, but if you overcook proteins, they'll start to break down, split apart, fish will get tough, dry out, custards will break. And one of the things that, here's kind of a sciencey part of cooking with eggs, is a lot of times the emulsifiers for your mayonnaise or for your hollandaise, and that's why you usually add a little bit of liquid, say water, and then whisk it for a while. Sometimes you warm it, and that exposes all the emulsifiers in the egg yolk, and then once you start to make your hollandaise or your mayonnaise, emulsifiers are there to help. So you've got proteins. Under proteins you have enzymes, a particular group of proteins. They're catalysts. So if you think of in vegetables, you'll go from a nice brilliant green to a dull olive, and that's as enzymes are attacking some of the proteins and other. It'll also break down meat. So if you think of meat tenderizers, bacon wrapped pineapple, if you use fresh pineapple and wrap it with bacon, if you cook it the next day, you'll see that the bacon is starting to break down and disintegrate, and there's a compound in fresh pineapple that'll actually attack the proteins in the fat or in the bacon. So that's why it's best to use canned pineapple, because once you heat the pineapple, it deactivates that enzyme. You can also use fresh pineapple and other fruits because it has the enzymes in it to actually tenderize the meat. And some of those, papaya is papain, figs, there's fission. And it's funny when you think of a lot of, like pineapple is a good one. And pineapple is great in marinades. It's kind of, is it the flavor? But aside from the flavor, it's actually working on tenderizing the food. Nutrients, I'll just kind of scroll through here. So vitamins. Proteins, we'll talk about vegetarians. Vegetarian diet is one consisting entirely or mostly of foods derived from plants. Vegans eat plants only. Lacto-vegetarians eat dairy products in addition to plant. Ovo-vegetarians will eat eggs, lacto-ovo, dairy and eggs. And then pesco, they'll eat fish and plants. Some of the things to keep in mind for vegetarians, they need to make sure they have complete proteins, vitamin B12, D, and calcium, which they can get from green leafy vegetables, dried legumes. So we talked a little bit about complete proteins, and they need to contain all 9 essential amino acids. So our bodies cannot produce 9 amino acids. We need to get them from our food, and any animal-based protein will contain all 9 essential amino acids. Incomplete, and they don't necessarily have to be at the same meal. Our body can store some of the amino acids, and then if you get it at your next meal or two, then it can recombine and make stuff. Grains that are complete proteins. So quinoa was a big grain that became popular a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, people in Peru and other countries who've relied on that grain for eons, all of a sudden all the American chefs were using it and drove up the price of it. Then all of a sudden these people weren't able to eat quinoa because the price of it became too expensive. Now that's kind of balanced itself out, but there's civilizations, and some of the grains are complete proteins in themselves. So like that, we are done with module number 2. You can finish your outline, take the quiz. That's it.